yesterday I was reading the English translation of that particular verse. So in case anyone's not quite familiar with what the origin of that was, so it's in Buddhist tradition, the Buddha attained to enlightenment, and he was sitting either under the Bodhi tree or some other kind of tree not very far away. He sat in bliss for about 6 weeks after the occasion of his enlightenment. But he was also considering whether or not his teaching was suitable to be heard by human beings. He thought this is a very difficult teaching. It goes against, we say in English, goes against the grain, goes against what people want. He thought this generation of people is addicted to pleasure and having fun. If I was to go among them and try to teach them this, what I've discovered, then I would reap a lot of disappointment and weariness and sorrow, because it would be completely pointless. So he's thinking these thoughts, and according to the tradition, certain devas, gods, if you like, or celestial beings, pick up on the thoughts. And they have been awaiting the arrival of the Buddha, hoping for the arrival of the Buddha. And so they're very struck with fear and worried that he might not be prepared to help the world. So this god, the Brahma god Sahambadi, comes and begs him, please, Lord, just for the sake of those with just a little dust in their eyes, could you please teach? So then, according to the tradition, the Buddha contemplates, having had this request. Well, he sees that there are many different kinds of people in the world, and he compares them to the lotus. So if you look at a pond where there are lotuses, some lotuses are below the level of the water, some are actually on the level of the water, and some are growing up out of the water. So he thinks, yes, well, there are many people who will not understand the teaching, not be able to benefit. But there are some who will benefit, who will be able to learn from the teaching and do the practice. And there are a few who will benefit enormously. So on that basis he thinks, okay, well, weighing it up, okay, I will teach, rather than just go away and hide somewhere in a cave in the Himalayas or something. So that's when he begins his decision, or he makes his decision to go and teach the Dhamma. So anyway, we repeat this verse every time a monk is giving a formal talk, and this verse is spoken usually by an Anigarika at Amavati. So it's Anigarika or Anigarika. So they chant this, and then the monk responds and goes to the high seat. So I thought I'd just come back to one or two issues that were brought up today. One was the issue of khandhas. We had this question which was quite complex about khandhas. So just to give you a rough idea, in case anyone is not so clear about khandhas, not to go through them all again, but to say that these 5 khandhas come together to create the human being. We talk about nama, we talk about nama and rupa. So rupa is the form element, the material element of life. In our case, in the human being's case, it's the body. Nama is those mental constituents excluding consciousness. So the feeling aspect, Vedana. The perception aspect, Sanya. And the mental formations, all the mental activities that go on around that, they are nama. And then there's consciousness, which is understanding or witnessing all of that. So many different consciousnesses. So those 5 khandhas or groups or aggregates or heaps because he's including under each of those aggregates many, many different things, but it's just like a simplified way of describing it. These aggregates come together, and then we have a human being. And then at death, the aggregates come apart. So they come together, and just like all other things in the conditioned realm that come together, eventually they have to separate. We can see this, can't we, with people who are very old or who have maybe suffered some kind of serious illness, that something perhaps in the mind is going a bit off. Maybe their memory suffers. They have a good long-term memory, but a lousy short-term memory. That's the case with my mother. She can remember the 1940s very well. Just ask her about the 1940s. As I say with my father, the 1940s, they talk about it. But ask her about 2 days ago, or even that morning, can't even remember. What? And other mental capabilities tend to go as well. So, or maybe something in the body is going. So this is a sign of the khandhas beginning to come apart, separate. And then we have the actual moment of passing away. I thought I'd address the main thrust of the talk, part of it anyway, to the hindrances. We haven't talked a great deal about the hindrances, but I'll just go through them so that if ever you need to think back, then this will be a kind of reference for you. So there are 5, what we call main, or 5 hindrances on the path of practice. So they are, as you probably know, or some of you know, sensual desire is one, hatred and ill will or aversion is another, sloth and torpor is another, restlessness and worry is another, and the 5th one is doubt. So each of these hindrances has a Pali name. So ill will is Vyapada, sensual desire Kamachanda, sloth and torpor Tinamida, restlessness and worry is Uducha Kukucha, and doubt is Vichikacha. So that's how they're known. Those are the kind of Pali names for those conditions. And the reason that they are discussed again and again, or expositions are made about them, is that they're so common. They afflict most people, one or more, afflict most people who are practicing on the path. And the thing is that we can take a particular hindrance, for example, let's say sloth and torpor. If you understand what that means, sloth and torpor, which means dullness and drowsiness, we can take that to be a personal failing. If I'm suffering from dullness and drowsiness, I can think, well, here I go again, this is me. As a meditator, I'm pathetic or useless, I'm a failure, because I always start getting sleepy. Or any of the other conditions which might arise in the course of meditation. You can start to think, well, I'm not really suited to meditation, I'm suffering from this particular condition again, it keeps coming up, and I'll never make it properly as a meditator, and so on. So we can make these things very personal. So that's why in this particular teaching they've made it so kind of obvious. These are the hindrances, these are the common blockages or obstacles in the course of the development of the practice. So as to say, well, it's not you, it's not personal, most people experience them. And that's why it's useful to talk about them. But they also, quite skillfully, they have come up with certain images, or the Buddha came up with certain images for these conditions. So, for example, sensual desire, what he does is he takes a basic image. The image is a man who wants to see his face clearly. And in those days, or at least most people didn't have a mirror. What they used was a bowl of water. So he's got a bowl of water, right? And he wants to look in his bowl of water just to see what his face is like. So the image for sensual desire is a strong dye. The water is full of a dye. So it could be yellow, white, red, blue, whatever. But it's one of these colours. And he's looking in the water, trying to see his face, but there's this dye obscuring the reflection. So it's like saying that when we're caught up in sensual desire, our whole perception is coloured and distorted by that particular drive. You know, we're motivated or driven by this very powerful desire. So just like his face can't be seen, we can't see the reality of things because of this very strong colouring of the mind. And the second image for ill will, hatred, anger, is if you've got the bowl of water, the man is trying to look in the bowl of water, he wants to see his face, but the bowl of water is being heated, and so it's bubbling, it's boiling, it's bubbling, so again he can't see his face clearly. And so it tries to capture this feeling of the heat of the aversion. When we really hate someone or we really dislike them, it's very hard to contain ourselves, and sometimes we explode. In the wrong situation we explode, just like the water can spurt up when it's being heated. So that's the comparison or the image for the second hindrance. And the third hindrance, which is sloth and torpor, they compare it to the bowl of water. The man's trying to look at his face, but the water is covered in algae, or algae. It's covered in this kind of plant, so he can't see his face. And it's like the mind is covered in something, and you can't see clearly when you're very drowsy, when you keep nodding off. So it's like this bowl of water with the algae. And the fourth one, restlessness and worry, is trying to look into the bowl of water, but this time there's a wind blowing, and the wind is blowing across the surface of the water, making waves. So again, you can't see his face. It's like there are winds, if you like, passing through the psyche or through the mind, turbulence of the mind. So the mind is always being stirred up, or always very restless. And the final one is doubt. So again, bowl of water, man trying to look at his face, and this time the water is full of mud. So the doubt just creates a kind of darkness in people's minds in terms of pursuing the path. So these are the hindrances. So in terms of sensual desire, when we are caught in sensual desire, we have a very selective way of seeing things. We see that which is enticing and alluring and delightful, and we cut out the things that aren't so delightful. So we're not seeing the whole picture. So we see the very attractive aspects of our body or somebody. And this often arises because we're projecting from ourselves our own need, if you like, is to project onto someone. And because of this need, we're not seeing the whole picture. So for example, you can project onto someone that they're almost perfect. You don't see their faults. because you don't want to see the faults. But later on, of course, you discover the faults. So there's a story from the suttas. Obviously, this is always a problem, or was always a problem for monks, particularly, well, any kind of monk, but the junior monk particularly. So the Buddha had an attendant. He was very famous, a monk called Ananda. Ananda was his devoted attendant who would make sure the Buddha was okay as far as he could. And he was also the one who was the gatekeeper. He would allow people in to see the Buddha whom the Buddha was prepared to see, or he would keep them out. He also requested of the Buddha that the Buddha told him all his teachings, because he had this incredible memory. And from all the teachings he hadn't been present to hear, he would ask the Buddha, please Lord, would you tell me what you taught at that particular moment, on that occasion. So he's quite a well-known monk in the suttas. Anyway, Ananda approaches the Buddha, and he has this doubt in his mind. He says, Lord, probably it's getting near the end of the Buddha's life. Lord, how shall we behave towards women? So the Buddha says, do not see them, Ananda. But Lord, if we should see them, how should we behave? Do not talk to them, Ananda. But Lord, if they talk to us, how shall we behave? Stay mindful, Ananda. That is advice. So in terms of sense desire, we are advised to look at the whole picture rather than just certain aspects of it, and in particular the nature of the body. So the ideal way to deal with it, I think, is to go to your own body and to examine your own body for its imperfections. The fact that it sweats and it has urine, it has excrement, it has hairs that drop out, it has nails that need to be clipped, and all the other things that we know about our own bodies. And if we can do that, then it helps us to understand, of course, all bodies are the same, and that someone else's body is also like this. And there are various practices. For example, the Asuba Practice is to actually go through the body, the whole body, and it divides it into 32 parts and asks the monk or the practitioner to go through each of these parts. So you can imagine, for example, if you actually divide the body up, for example, take someone's hair. If you have a table, and you put the hair on the table, and then the skin on the table, the teeth on the table, the nails, and other parts of the body, divide them up, how attractive are they? So this is a general piece of advice with regard to sensual desire. If one is caught in it, if a meditator is caught in sensual desire, to use these kinds of devices as a way of freeing yourself from that, not being enslaved to it. And that's not to denigrate anybody, but just to get a fuller view or picture of what a body entails. One can also think about, if one was to follow the sensual desire fully, where does it lead one to? What are the consequences? Because we just think about the delightful aspects of sense desire, but what are the consequences if you follow that desire? So that's another way of seeing it, because we tend to freeze frame on just the pleasant aspects without considering what happens after that. There's also a story about a nun, which may be a bit of a shock to you, but anyway, this nun was very attractive, and she was living in a forest or living in a kuti in a lonely place, but she was also an arahant. She'd realised, liberation. And a man comes to the grove to tempt her. And in those days, they thought that people who were goldsmiths were particularly full of lust. So this man is a goldsmith, and he comes to the grove and he's sort of courting her and saying all these wonderful trees and the wind is blowing, and starts praising her physical parts and so on. And he's promising her, well, I'll give you lots of ornaments and you'll be on a high and luxurious bed and everything will be wonderful for you. So anyway, he's praising her eyes. So the nun says, well, if you like my eyes so much, you can have them. So she squeezes out one of her eyes and gives it to him. And he's immediately absolutely shaken and shattered. And he sort of more or less gets down on his knees and begs her forgiveness. And then she goes to see the Buddha, and by a psychic miracle, he heals her eye. The other aspect of this is that monks and nuns are obviously guarding their sense doors. They're not trying to sort of get too caught up in sensuality. Whereas the society that we live in now is promoting sensuality all the time through films and TV and internet and advertising. And the drive behind this is to make money. So if we expose ourselves a lot to sensual images, then of course it stirs the mind up. So again, this is something we have control of. It's not just a matter of the monk or the nun in their kuti not dwelling on certain images in their mind, but also, if you feel you have a problem with sensual desire, then what are you feeding into the mind? You have a control over that. You can have turn something off or not look in certain newspapers or certain magazines. In Britain we have a very kind of, sometimes it's referred to as the gutter press. The newspapers in Britain are constantly promoting these images to sell. So anyway, we have a choice as an individual to follow that and to indulge in that or not to. We can sort of draw a line and say, okay, I'm not interested in that. So anyway, moving on to the second one, which is ill will, aversion, hatred and anger. So usually we regard the source of these kinds of emotions is lying outside of ourselves. We say, well, this person or those people or this particular situation brought up that sense of anger in me. But usually there's something here as well. It takes, we say in English, it takes two to tango. In other words, there's usually a latent tendency here to feel anger as well, or to feel aversion. So anyway, the way to with each of these hindrances, one solution or one attempt at the solution is to observe them with mindfulness. We don't have to get caught up in them. We don't have to regard the anger or whatever it is as mine. We don't have to identify with it. We can just say, well, this is anger. we were talking earlier today about how you can bear with anger or with these kind of negative mind states, and just allow it to be there, to fill the body and to allow it to eventually pass off its own accord. But sometimes we can't do that. In a situation where we feel, anyway, we've been provoked to anger, what do we do in that situation? Because it's the way someone's talked to us, it's the way that we've been frustrated, it's the way that we feel we've been let down or lied to or whatever, and we're reacting in the moment. So in terms of any particular incident and how we're feeling at that moment, the advice is not to act on the anger, but to contain it. So at that point in time you might need to repress it, to hold it, to contain it. But later on, if you need to cope with the anger, then at a more private occasion, so when you're sitting on your own in the kuti, then you can bring it up. You can just, through the memory of something, you can trigger anger and allow it to be there. So Thich Nhat Hanh talks about the difference between allowing anger into the heart, so you know it thoroughly, and venting anger. Because in the West, there's a lot of confusion around this. People think, if I can express my anger, if I can thump the table or shout, then I will release it. Somehow I will, I'll be free of it. So it used to amuse. I used to be a volunteer teacher in Thailand. For about 2 years, I was a teacher in a school on the edge of Bangkok, and because the Europeans who got used to the Thai ways, we got sort of acculturated with the Thai a bit. It used to amuse us how Westerners behaved, because they would do the things that would inevitably lead to them being frustrated. So one thing is, Westerners who didn't understand the Thai customs, if they were in a restaurant and they weren't getting exactly what they wanted, or they felt they were being blocked or so on, they would bang the table and they would shout. Because that's what if you do that in Europe, you get the attention, you get the service. People start, okay. But often in Thailand, it would work to their disadvantage. Because what happens then is, for the Thai, if you express your anger like that, it's very rude. It's not, you're being a barbarian, really. So they back off, kind of leave you on your own. Anyway, the main thrust of the advice in relation to anger, if we're feeling a lot of anger, is of course to cultivate metta, loving kindness. So if we're cultivating metta across a range of people, the person that we feel the enmity for or feel the anger towards is probably the last one in the list, when we've built up a pattern of wishing well to people. And it may not work, it may work, it may not work, but at least we start to create this, if we practice metta on a regular basis, the fountain of goodwill in here. If you can do this on a regular basis, you do, I find, you've got a fountain of goodwill to draw on. So when you go into these situations, or you find yourself in a situation where a lot of anger is coming up, or hatred, then you can go back to that, and you can draw on it. But one helpful thing in terms of cultivating metta, particularly in relation to someone you dislike or you feel anger towards, is to try to see the good side of that person. So we all have different sides to us. Nobody is all good, and nobody is all bad. So, if you have a very negative view of someone, can you find the good side of that person? Can you concentrate on the good side? And if you can't find even a good side, at least you can contemplate that they too are human, and they're suffering, and they have a wish to be happy too, just like you are. So you can find that common humanity. They are suffering just like I am, and they too have a wish to be happy. And one bit of advice, I don't know whether it really works, is if you really have a strong aversion for someone, to offer them a gift. That by doing that you break through the negativity, and if you give them something, make them smile or make them feel better, then you won't feel the same level of aversion. But the problem with aversion is if we dwell in it a lot, if the mind dwells in aversion a lot, then it really does help to create poisons in the system. So the idea is to gradually train the mind not to dwell in aversion so much, at least, but to bring it out into a happier or more productive realm, like one of loving kindness. One thing is we can see that, if someone is doing things that are unkind or cruel, if we have an understanding of karma, we know that anyone doing that kind of thing is going to reap the results of their own actions. So we may feel, oh, I'm going to teach that person a lesson, or I'm going to put them right, but if we can hold back and say, okay, well, this person, I have to feel compassion for this person because they're making such a mistake, in being so horrible or beastly or cruel. They will reap the results of their own actions. So it's an understanding of karma can help us also to let go of anger and ill will. So I think I mentioned in the Bucharest weekend that there was a meeting of Western psychiatrists with the Dalai Lama, and these psychiatrists were saying that they had explored the area of post-traumatic stress disorder. They thought they had some interesting information to pass to the Dalai Lama to help with regard to Tibetan refugees, the Tibetan exiles who had suffered torture at the hands of the Chinese. But when they went into explanations and descriptions of what they had been encountering with the American public, and particularly perhaps with soldiers returned from Vietnam, the Dalai Lama said, well, actually, among Tibetans, we don't have this experience of post-traumatic stress disorder. And it appeared that the Tibetans, even the Tibetans who had been tortured by the Chinese, either they felt compassion for them because they realized that this person, to do what they're doing, has to have a terrible mind state, or they understood in terms of karma the context, and that this person would inevitably suffer in the long run because of what they were doing. So the third one is to do with sloth and torpor. So this is something that often afflicts us, doesn't it, in terms of meditation? We're going to sleep, we're drowsy, or we're nodding. And I was talking about this quite a bit in the Bucharest weekend retreat, but it has afflicted many monks over the course of their practice time, and we used to have these all-night sits in Britain. Currently we have sits that go up to midnight, usually to midnight. on the moon days. But when I first was part of the Sangha, we used to sit up until 3:30 in the morning, and then we would chant from 3:30 to 4, and we would go to bed at 4 o'clock. So there was a lot of potential for these dull, drowsy states, and in particular for nodding. So monks would get into nodding like this. I've got lots of very humorous stories about monks who are nodding at the front. Maybe in the end their head hits the floor. Certain monks tried to come up with interesting devices to stop themselves doing it, like putting a book on their head. It's all going a little bit extreme. But the idea with dullness and drowsiness, just like with the younger states, is that if you can observe it and penetrate it without identifying with it, then it will, of its own accord, it will begin to pass away. Now, this is probably the most difficult thing to do, but if you can mindfully observe the dullness and drowsiness and penetrate its nature, then it will of its own accord start to disappear. Now maybe we can't do that, but we can actually, so if we can't, then we can practice by opening up more to light. So we can open the eyes, we can straighten the posture, because posture is very important in these matters. And if necessary, there is also a particular meditation on golden light. In that meditation, you bring golden light into your body and fill your body with golden light. And the more light you have, and the less sleepy you will feel you will be inclined to be. Otherwise, the advice is get up, change the posture, splash water on the face, do some walking meditation, something like that. Pretty obvious stuff. But not to live under that, but to make an effort to overcome it, to come through it. We bring up some energy and some determination to cut through the dull and drowsy mind states. And there are certain senior monks who admitted it, they've said it themselves, that they were sitting on the high seat, giving a talk, and they went to sleep during giving the talk. So someone goes up and gives them a bit of a nudge. I remember in the early years when I was at Chithurst, there was a joke, the monks used to make this joke to the lay people. They would say, it seems in the lay life that people have a problem with getting to sleep. But we have a different problem. Our problem is staying awake. So the fourth one is restlessness and worry. I used to think that restlessness and worry the restlessness would be a physical restlessness. But of course I hadn't got that right. I used to think of all the hindrances, this was the one I didn't experience so much as the others, but in fact it was probably the one I experienced more than any other. And when we talk about restlessness, it means the mind constantly going around. It can't settle. It's going from one topic to another, to another, to another, to another, going around. I used to think it's like going around a baseball pitch. You can't stay still. So you want it to stay still, but it won't. Or you're lost in worry about something. The mind keeps on going on and on about it. So once again, the advice is really, can you observe it mindfully? Can you penetrate it and not identify with it? This is not me, this is not my restlessness, my worry, it's just restlessness and worry. If you can do that, you start to let go of it. But if that doesn't work, then the best solution they recommend is just to focus on one object. So that's when you have to make a real effort, because the natural tendency of the mind is just to keep moving round and round and round and round, jumping from one topic to another, to another, to another, to another. So what you have to do is make a real effort to focus on one object. And for myself, I found the most useful object was the soles of my feet. The furthest thing away from the head, I would concentrate on the soles of the feet. And if I kept going back to the soles of the feet, then the mind would gradually, take time, start to slow down. But you have to have that will to keep coming back to the object. You don't give up. And gradually the mind will slow down. And the fifth hindrance is doubt. So this could be any kind of doubt, really. It can be doubt about the teaching that the Buddha left behind. It can be doubt about my suitability to be a meditator, or to be a monk, or to be a lay practitioner. It can be doubt about an aspect of the teaching. It can be doubt about an aspect of the vinaya. So for some junior monks practicing in the forest or in the jungle, their mind will get into a doubt situation about the rules and about what they had done, whether they had broken a rule. And that will become for them a kind of obsessive doubt, and they would need to come away from their hut in the jungle and consult someone. But for most of us, it isn't like that. It's about, am I really suitable, or is this practice really suitable for me? Or what about this, or what about that? Certain doubts creep in. This is normal. As I say, it's a hindrance. It's not a personal failing. So the advice is to look at the doubt. Again, don't identify. This is doubt. Can you begin to see doubt arising whenever this is doubt, when it comes up? This is doubt. This is doubt. And you start to let go of it. And the other aspect is to go to someone who is perhaps more experienced than you are in terms of practice or of understanding the teachings, and consult with them. Ask them, what about this? What about that? Or failing that, go to a book, go to the suttas or whatever you regard as an authority. So those are various ways of trying to look at the hindrances, understand their nature and let go of them. So just to go back to one other issue that came up today, we were talking about misunderstanding things or misperceiving things, and someone used the word fault, as though someone is guilty of a misperception or a misunderstanding of how things work. So there are, within the teachings, there is a group of what they call vipallasa, or cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions, that is, that we project onto the world things which aren't there. We misunderstand the world. Or we can misunderstand in terms of a thought, a view, and something else, a desire. I think. Anyway, we can misunderstand in various ways. And the four vipallasas are that we, as ignorant human beings, not enlightened human beings, we tend to see that which is, we tend to see the pleasant in the painful. So this will be about sense desire. So according to the teachings, these things are ultimately painful. So you can think about it this way. Supposing your favourite sweet is ice cream, and it gives you a real sense hit. Ice cream is delicious, I love it. Now, supposing you carry on eating ice cream for the next 3 hours, that which is pleasant initially becomes utterly repulsive and gives you stomachache. Or if you enjoy watching a film, it's nothing, I'm not saying it's wrong to watch a film, but if you enjoy watching a film and then you watch films for 20 or 30 hours continuously, how do you feel? Another aspect is that we tend to see permanence in that which is impermanent. This is a very strong human desire, isn't it? We love, or we want to think that things will last. We enjoy stories, we enjoy films, we enjoy entertainment that suggests that things do last. It's a natural thing for us. But if you actually listen to these stories, does it make sense, So, let's say boy meets girl, something comes in between them, some evil person tries to separate them. Heroic things happen and eventually boy reunites with girl, and then they get married. And then the text says, and then they lived happily ever after. So do they live ever after? Do they not get old? Is it true that they're always happy? We have to examine these things. This is what we want to believe. It's quite natural, it makes us feel comfortable and warm and so on, that there is eternal happiness and love and so forth. But the actual reality of it is, well, it's not quite like that, is it? So yes, we want to see, and we tend to see the permanent in that which is impermanent. So we like to build a solid world around us. This will last. These buildings, our culture, Britain or Romania will last. But will they? What happened to the Roman Empire? Or the Byzantine Empire? How long will they last? How long will the EU last? We like to create these apparent permanent block, solid objects, but they're not solid at all, really. And another of the vipallasa is that we tend to see beauty in the repulsive. So this is to do with the body. The bodies aren't clean, but they aren't as delightful as we think they are. We see beauty in the repulsive. So anyway, this is how an arahant, an enlightened being, will see things. Well, why is it that we see these vipallasa? Why is it we are caught in these cognitive distortions? And the answer given is that we suffer from ayoniso manasikara, which is unwise attention or a careless attention to how things really are. If we really look at them with careful attention, wise attention, yoniso manasikara, not ayoniso manasikara, then we will see impermanence in the impermanent. We'll see the painful in the painful. We'll see the repulsive in the repulsive. And the other aspect, the vipallasa aspect, is that normally we like to see self in that which is not self. We create the entity or the essence of a self. Myself, other people, that all have selves. So in terms of the teaching, no, that's a mistake. It's a vipallasa, it's a distortion. So if we look carefully, with wise attention, careful attention, then we will see that there is no self in the not self. So these are just reflections. There's no need to feel inadequate just because you can't see immediately with careful attention or understanding or the vipasas and so on. It's just suggestions to the mind that these are possible distortions that we suffer from, but there are also ways of straightening those distortions out. So seeing more truly, more accurately what's really going on. So sometimes monks are sort of advised to, if you have something which is delightful, can you see that which is repulsive in the thing which is delightful? And if you have something which is repulsive to you, disgusting, can you see that which is pleasant in the repulsive? When you have something that is boring for you, can you see that which is interesting in that which is boring? And when you're fascinated by something, can you see that something in that which is not so fascinating at all? So it's inviting inspection. What our minds do or create in the world around us, inviting inspection and careful or wise attention. So on that note, I'd like to offer this for your reflection. So are there any questions, or you can make points or come from your own experience if there's something you want to share? So, I was in a Catholic church the other day with Daniel, and it was a very beautiful church. It's a modern church in a suburb of Bucharest, and a very charming and friendly priest. And then various illustrations adorning the windows and the walls, beautifully done, I have to say. So it was a very beautiful place, but some of the aspects of the teachings in Christianity seemed to me very strange, about loving the bride and the groom. It's just like the bride and the groom, God and you. It seems so odd to me, particularly after years of Buddhism. So Buddhism can sound very kind of harsh and dry and perhaps miserable. But when I hear those kinds of teachings that the love of God, the bride and the groom, and all this, and I just think it's quite extraordinary teaching. Anyway, it's just on the side. Okay, well, if there are no questions or points, let's have